Well, it took me this long to talk about an episode involving Charlie, and if any of you are wondering, is it another Charlie and Panda episode? I've already took care of that in Panda's art several months ago, or a few. So in this episode, I'm gonna be talking about him along with an additional character that I haven't talked about yet. And his name is Ralph, and he only appears twice throughout the entire show when it comes to appearances, and with his major role in this episode, he just wants to take advantage over everyone because of a board game. I know this isn't really a good way to talk about his character, but that's basically what his character is. He just takes advantage of everyone, and I was considering that this is supposed to be a makeup to make Charlie a better character towards him, and in the first episode involving Ralph, it kinda backfired, but in this episode, Ice Cave, it kinda works. Let me make one thing perfectly clear. I just don't like Charlie as a character. I don't hate him. I didn't find him annoying aside from his major debut, but I didn't find any likability other than mostly being a better friend towards Panda. But since this episode is centering around his own development instead of relationships, I assume that they're just trying to make him mostly redeemable by going against Ralph. And Ralph isn't really Charlie's brother or sibling whatsoever. He used to be his friend in the first episode, but after the aftermath, they're not really friends anymore, and I'm pretty sure that what they're doing with Ralph in these episodes is mostly a tour for what Charlie needs to go against. Anyway, I need to talk about the plot of this episode. The Bears, along with Charlie, denies Ralph's request on playing the ice board game, and Ralph doesn't really care whatsoever. That's basically all about him. He's careless, and during the middle of the night, he completely destroys the thermostat in the cave that was attached to the refrigerator, which is where he kidnaps Ice Bear and places him in the bathtub in ice. In the morning, Grizz and Panda wakes up and saw that the entire cave is an entire ice cave. And the reason why Ralph did this is that he wants to be proof that he's better than everyone else by being the king, which in the board game, you become king once you won the board game. Let me just say that Ralph is honestly delusional, but so does Charlie, but in a very villanistic way when compared to Charlie, who is more of a friendly character. Let me point out that Ralph, despite being mostly the opposite of Charlie, I don't hate him as much as the other characters from other shows. Even though his motivation is just basically just trying to be better than everyone and just threatens people, he's just basically there just so that Charlie can be mostly relatable. I've already mentioned that before, but just by looking at Ralph and the fact that he only appears in 2 episodes in total throughout the entire show, he's obviously a plot device. I know some of you guys say that plot devices isn't really a good thing when it comes to characters like Ralph. But one of the reasons why I don't consider these as an issue towards Ralph is because he really is just basically just desperate for attention, but not in a way just to get into everyone else's face. I mean, in his introduction, in his debut, he wasn't usually getting into people's face. Like, he doesn't knock down the door or anything. Sure, he did some threatening stuff towards the other characters, but only for his own benefit in order to be on top against anyone. In this episode, he managed to change the entire cave into ice, because he completely kidnaps Ice Bear and places him into a tub full of ice so that he can make sure that he doesn't be taken down by Ice Bear, since that we've saw in the beginning of the episode, well, Ice Bear takes Ralph out of the cave. If there's anything to stop Ice Bear in any situation when it comes to the antagonist, it's probably just freezing Ice Bear into a block of ice in order to get the upper hand. I know it's not really a fair way to take down the other characters, but this is ice bale, and he spent most of his cub years in the Arctic. Anyway, Charlie in this episode, he just can't be able to go against Ralph because he isn't strong enough, and this is why I sympathize with him, since that it is true. Charlie spent most of his life in the woods, and he has a fear towards humans, so I can understand that his life isn't just like the Bale's life where they can go out in public in San Francisco. So it really made me appreciate what they're trying to do with Charlie in this. The board game, which is called Cane of the Frost Mountain, is well he wants to enjoy time with the Bales, and the fact that Ralph just comes in and just ruins everything. It's honestly a difficult task for him to make a stand for himself. And with this episode centering around a big bully picking on a very small character, I can easily relate to Charlie into these situations. Granted, I'm never into these situations involving a big bully, but for what Ralph does is to actually give Charlie more confidence in order to go up against Ralph. Since that Grizz, Panda, and Icebell are unable to help him, he actually decides to fight against Ralph in the ice cave. And let me tell you, for how humorous this fight is when it comes to how Charlie dodges most of Ralph's attacks, it's still a very entertaining fight regardless. And the way that Charlie wins by crunching the cheese puffies with his hands and blowing the dust into Ralph's face is actually a really interesting way to win. Because let's be honest, Ralph is too strong enough against Charlie, and without the cheese puffies, then Charlie will probably lose. And the way that he forces Ralph outside of the cave instead of, killing him, that Charlie doesn't do that. And it's actually kind of humorous since he doesn't usually take the board game seriously, since that Ralph is actually doing the whole Cane of the Frost Mountain board game in order to prove to everyone that he is the Cane. Even though that the Bales accept Charlie as the Cane of the cave, they pretty much know that Ralph doesn't deserve to be Cane whatsoever, and he deserves to be kicked out yet again. While I could have picked a better choice involving an episode with Charlie, this episode, on the other hand, isn't really a terrible choice regardless. Besides, there are still other characters I still yet to talk about, and we only have one more week until we head into next week to culminate We Bear Bears month. And yes, Charlie will come back, but let's just say that he's gonna be appear in the final video of this month, and I probably spoil on what episode that is if you did watch all the episodes. I give this episode a 7 out of 10.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole crew, we live with no rules. Let's get this started again. So if you feel like me too, there's only one thing to do. Let's go. Pay down, call a taxi cab. Got a case in the fridge and a bottle at the crib. Let's all get twisted, double fisting, drink up no resisting. Let's get this started again. Let's get this started again. Let's get this